"If they find us, they'll drown me dead," she cried, her voice breaking like thunder across the mesa as blood streamed down her torn wedding dress. And in that moment, Chief Fox Nightfeather knew that saving this desperate bride would either restore his people's honor or destroy everything he'd sworn to protect. The high desert of New Mexico territory stretched endlessly under a sky the color of old brass, where storm clouds gathered like dark omens above the sacred red rocks of Whispering Canyon. It was September 1884, and the wind carried more than dust across the barren landscape. It carried the scent of violence, betrayal, and a woman's desperate flight from a fate worse than death. Chief Fox Nightfeather sat motionless atop his paint stallion, Tohono, scanning the horizon with eyes that had seen too much war, too much loss, too much of what the white man's justice could do to his people. At 32, he bore the weight of leadership like a stone in his chest, his long black hair braided with eagle feathers that caught the desert wind. The silver and turquoise bands on his arms marked him as chief of the Canyon people, the last free band of Navajo who had refused the reservation, who still lived by the old ways in these hidden canyons that the government maps called empty wasteland. He had come to the sacred spring of his ancestors to pray for guidance, to ask the spirits what path his people should take as more soldiers arrived each month. As the boundaries of their freedom shrank like a drying riverbed, the spring bubbled up from deep in the earth, clear and cold, surrounded by ancient petroglyphs that told the stories of his grandfather's grandfathers. It was here that Fox had received his Vision Quest name 17 summers ago. Here that he had learned to speak with the voices that rode the wind. But today the wind brought something else entirely. The sound reached him first, hoofbeats pounding against stone, desperate and uneven. The rhythm of a horse pushed beyond endurance. Fox's hand moved instinctively to the rifle across his saddle, a Winchester he had taken from a cavalry patrol that had strayed too far into canyon country and paid the price. Through the shimmering heat he saw her, a figure in white stumbling down the treacherous trail that led to the sacred spring. Her horse lathered with foam and nearly spent. She was white, that much was clear even at a distance, her pale skin stark against the red rock walls. Her dress had once been beautiful, layers of silk and lace that spoke of wealth and ceremony, but now it was torn and stained with dust and something darker, blood. Her blonde hair, which had clearly been arranged in elaborate curls for some special occasion, now hung loose and wild around her shoulders like spun gold catching the desert light. Fox should have ridden away, should have left this white woman to whatever fate pursued her. His people had learned hard lessons about getting involved in the troubles of the Wasiku, the greedy ones who took everything and gave back only bullets and broken promises. But something in the way she rode, something in the desperate set of her shoulders, reminded him of his sister Ayana's flight from the cavalry 7 years ago, a flight that had ended in blood and screams and a grave that still haunted his dreams. The woman's horse stumbled, nearly throwing her, and Fox heard her voice carry across the canyon like a cry from the spirit world itself. "Please, if there's anyone out there, anyone who believes in mercy, help me." The words were spoken in perfect English, cultured and refined, but underneath lay a terror so pure it transcended language. That's when Fox heard the second set of hoofbeats, still distant but closing fast, not one horse, but many, the thunder of a posse in full pursuit. He counted the rhythm, 8 horses, maybe 10, riding hard and with purpose. Men who knew how to track, who wouldn't stop until they found what they were hunting. The woman reached the spring and threw herself from her exhausted horse, falling to her knees beside the sacred water. Fox watched as she cupped the clear liquid in her trembling hands, drinking deeply, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. It was then that she looked up and saw him. Their eyes met across the sacred ground, and Fox felt something shift in the world around them, like the moment before lightning strikes when the very air holds its breath. Her eyes were green as spring grass, wide with terror, but also with a kind of desperate courage that Fox recognized in warriors who had nothing left to lose. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with the kind of refined beauty that spoke of ballrooms and garden parties, of a life lived far from the harsh realities of the frontier. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the thin desert air. "Don't let them take me back. They'll kill me, or worse, they'll make me wish I was dead." Fox remained motionless, studying her, reading the story written in her torn dress and bloodied hands. The blood wasn't hers, he realized. It was too much, too fresh, and she moved without the careful gait of someone nursing wounds. Someone else's blood had painted her wedding dress crimson. "Who pursues you?" Fox asked in English, his voice carrying the careful cadence of someone who had learned the white man's tongue from missionaries and soldiers, from treaties that were broken before the ink dried. "My husband," she said, the word dripping with such venom that Fox's horse shifted nervously beneath him. "Judge Cornelius Blackwood of Colorado Springs. And his men, they call themselves lawmen, but they're nothing but murderers with badges." The name Blackwood hit Fox like a physical blow. He knew that name, knew it from the nightmares that woke him screaming, from the reports that filtered through the network of traders and scouts who brought news from the outside world. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, the man who had sentenced 43 Apache children to death for the crime of defending their families. The man who had declared that the only good Indian is a dead Indian from his bench in Colorado Springs. The man whose signature had authorized the massacre at Clearwater Creek, where Fox's cousin Running Bear had died protecting women and children. "You are his wife?" Fox's voice was carefully neutral, but his hand tightened on his rifle. "I was supposed to be," she said, rising unsteadily to her feet. "The ceremony was this morning. But when I saw what he really was, when I learned what he planned to do to me, to others, I couldn't go through with it. I ran. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Fox estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before the posse reached the sacred spring. 10 minutes to decide whether to abandon this white woman to her fate or risk everything his people had built in these hidden canyons. "What did you see?" Fox asked, sliding down from his horse with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. "What made you run on your wedding day?" The woman, she hadn't given her name, looked at him with eyes that held depths of horror Fox had seen only in the faces of survivors, those who had witnessed things that changed them forever. "He showed me his collection," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In his private study, scalps, dozens of them. Men, women," her voice broke, "children. He called them his trophies, said each one represented justice served against the savage races." Fox felt the familiar cold rage settle in his bones, the same fury that had sustained him through 7 years of guerrilla warfare against the cavalry, 7 years of protecting his people from men like Judge Blackwood. But there was something else in her story, something that didn't quite fit. "You said they would drown you," Fox observed. "Why drowning?" Her laugh was bitter as desert wind. "Because Blackwood has a special hatred for women who defy him. He told me once about his first wife, how she tried to leave him, how he held her head under the water in their own bathtub until she stopped struggling. He said it was the perfect crime, no marks, no evidence, just a tragic accident. A grieving widower who remarried quickly to ease his broken heart. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity." Fox had heard whispers of Judge Blackwood's previous wives, 3 of them, all dead within 2 years of marriage. All ruled accidental deaths by Blackwood's own court. "What is your name?" Fox asked, knowing that names had power, that once he knew who she really was, there would be no turning back from whatever came next. "Ophelia Wells," she said. "But everyone calls me Leah. I was the daughter of Senator Hamilton Wells of Colorado. My father promised me to Blackwood to secure his support for the railroad expansion through Indian territory." Fox felt the world shift again, understanding flooding through him like water through a broken dam. This wasn't just a runaway bride. This was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the territory, a woman whose disappearance would bring down the full weight of federal authority on whoever helped her. But she was also a weapon, a piece of information that could destroy Judge Blackwood if used correctly. The hoofbeats were close now, perhaps 5 minutes away. Fox could hear voices carried on the wind, harsh, angry voices demanding to know if anyone had seen the judge's woman. Time was running out. "If I help you," Fox said, his dark eyes boring into hers, "my people will pay the price. Blackwood will bring soldiers, cavalry, enough men to turn these canyons into graveyards. Are you worth that cost?" Leah's face went pale, but her chin lifted with a pride that Fox recognized in himself, the pride of someone who refused to bow even when bowing might mean survival. "I won't lie to you," she said. "If you help me, they'll hunt you. But if you don't, if you let them take me back, I'll be dead within a month, and Blackwood will use my father's grief to push through laws that will destroy every tribe from here to California. He's planning something called the final solution, a way to end what he calls the Indian problem once and for all." Fox stared at her, weighing the truth in her words against the safety of his people. In the distance, he could see dust clouds marking the approach of the posse, 8 riders. Just as he had estimated, their horses fresh and their guns glinting in the afternoon sun. "There's a cave," Fox said suddenly, his decision made not by logic, but by the same instinct that had kept him alive through 7 years of war. "Sacred to my people. They won't look there, won't dare to defile holy ground." He grabbed Tohono's reins and began leading the paint stallion toward a narrow cleft in the canyon wall, a crack barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. Leah followed without question, leading her exhausted mare, her torn wedding dress catching on the rough stone as they squeezed through the hidden entrance. The cave beyond was larger than it appeared from outside, lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the rock ceiling. Ancient paintings covered the walls, buffalo hunts, vision quests, the sacred ceremonies of Fox's ancestors. In the center of the cave, a natural basin collected water that seeped through the rock, creating a small pool that reflected the painted spirits on the walls, like a window into the other world. "Stay here," Fox commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Do not speak, do not move, do not even breathe loudly. These walls are sacred. They will protect you if you show them respect." Leah nodded, sinking down beside the sacred pool with obvious relief. Fox studied her for a moment. This white woman, who had fled from privilege into the wilderness, who carried herself with dignity even in her torn finery and desperate circumstances. There was strength in her, a core of steel beneath the refined exterior that reminded him of his grandmother. The medicine woman who had taught him that sometimes the spirits sent tests disguised as disasters. "Why?" Leah asked suddenly. "Why are you risking everything for someone you don't even know?" Fox paused at the cave entrance, considering her question. The answer came to him like a voice on the wind. Words his grandfather had spoken on the day Fox became chief. "Because sometimes," he said, "saving one person is the same as saving everyone." He slipped back through the narrow entrance just as the first riders appeared at the sacred spring, their horses snorting and pawing the ground, their faces hard with the kind of determination that came from following the orders of a powerful man. Fox recognized the type, not true lawmen, but hired guns wearing badges. The kind of men who asked no questions as long as the pay was good. The leader was a tall, lean man with a drooping mustache and eyes like winter ice, a silver star pinned to his leather vest that looked freshly polished. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world, never questioned whether his actions were right or wrong. "You there, Indian," the man called out, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of someone from back east who had learned to speak slowly to make himself understood by what he considered inferior minds. "I'm Deputy Marshal Tom Rawlings, operating under the authority of Judge Blackwood of Colorado Springs. We're looking for a woman, white woman, blonde hair, wearing a wedding dress. She's dangerous, mentally unbalanced. Have you seen her?" Fox remained silent, letting the wind carry his answer. Around him, the sacred petroglyphs seemed to pulse with ancient power, reminding him that this ground had been holy to his people for 1,000 years, that it had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, that it would endure long after Judge Blackwood and his men were dust. "I asked you a question, boy," Rawlings said, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his pistol. "It's considered polite to answer when a white man speaks to you." Fox looked up at the deputy marshal, his dark eyes reflecting nothing but the endless sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet dignity of mountains and wind. "This is sacred ground," Fox said simply. "No white woman has passed this way." It wasn't exactly a lie. Leah had passed through the hidden entrance, not this way, not past the sacred spring where they now stood. But Fox could see that Rawlings wasn't interested in subtle distinctions. The deputy's face darkened with the kind of anger that came from being denied something he felt entitled to. "Listen here, Chief Sitting Bull," Rawlings said, the mockery dripping from his voice like poison. "Judge Blackwood is offering a $1,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of his bride. That's more money than your whole tribe sees in a year. Now, are you going to be smart about this? Or are we going to have to search every inch of this godforsaken wasteland?" $1,000, Fox thought. More than enough to buy fresh horses, weapons, supplies for his people through the coming winter. More than enough to secure safe passage to Mexico for the families who wanted to flee south rather than face the reservation. But it was also blood money. Payment for delivering an innocent woman to a monster who collected scalps like other men collected coins. "I have seen no white woman," Fox repeated, his voice steady as stone. "Perhaps she has gone north toward the railroad towns. Many fugitives seek to lose themselves in the crowds there." Rawlings studied Fox for a long moment, his pale eyes searching for any sign of deception. Behind him, the other riders grew restless, their horses sensing their master's frustration. These were not patient men, Fox realized. They were used to getting what they wanted through intimidation and violence, unused to being defied by someone they considered racially inferior. "You know what I think, Indian," Rawlings said finally. "I think you're lying. I think that woman came through here, and I think you know exactly where she is. And when we find her, and we will find her, Judge Blackwood is going to remember that you weren't helpful." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a signal fire, clear and unmistakable. Fox had heard such threats before, from cavalry officers and territorial governors, from men who believed that power gave them the right to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Some of those men were dead now, their bones bleaching in hidden canyons, their names forgotten by everyone except the coyotes who had scattered their remains. "Judge Blackwood's memory is his own burden to bear," Fox said quietly. "Mine is clear." Rawlings' hand tightened on his pistol grip, and Fox saw the moment when the deputy decided that patience was a luxury he could no longer afford. The other riders sensed it too, shifting in their saddles, hands moving toward their weapons with the practiced ease of men who solved most problems with lead and gunpowder. But before violence could erupt at the sacred spring, another sound cut through the tension, the distant rumble of thunder from the storm clouds that had been building all afternoon. The sky, which had been brass and blue, now showed dark patches spreading like ink stains across the heavens. Wind began to pick up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of flash floods that could turn peaceful arroyos into roaring torrents in minutes. "Storm's coming," one of Rawlings's men observed, casting nervous glances at the darkening sky. "We should head back to town, regroup, come back when the weather clears." Rawlings looked ready to argue, but another rumble of thunder, closer this time, made the decision for him. Flash floods in canyon country were no respecter of badges or authority. They killed the righteous and the wicked with equal efficiency. "This isn't over, Indian," Rawlings said, wheeling his horse around. "Judge Blackwood doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. We'll be back with more men, and we'll tear these canyons apart rock by rock if we have to." Fox watched them ride away, their horses kicking up dust that the rising wind scattered like the ashes of burned hopes. Only when the last rider had disappeared around the bend did he allow himself to breathe deeply, to feel the full weight of what he had just committed himself and his people to. He had defied the authority of one of the most powerful men in the territory. He had lied to federal deputies. He had given sanctuary to a fugitive whose very presence could bring down the full wrath of the government on the canyon people. By any measure of logic or prudence, he had made a catastrophic mistake. But as Fox slipped back through the hidden entrance to the sacred cave, as he saw Leah Wells sitting beside the holy pool with gratitude and terror warring in her green eyes, he knew that some decisions could not be measured by logic. Some choices came from deeper places, from the voices of ancestors who had faced similar crossroads, from the understanding that there were fates worse than death and honors more valuable than survival. "They're gone," Fox said simply. For now, Leah looked up at him with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, and thunder rolled across the sacred ground, like the voice of spirits approving of choices made in darkness and doubt. Choices that would change everything for both of them. The rain came like a blessing from the ancient spirits, washing the desert clean and filling every crack in the red rock with silver streams that would erase all trace of their passage. Inside the sacred cave, Fox Nightfeather sat across from Ophelia Wells. The flickering light from a small fire he had built, casting dancing shadows on the painted walls where his ancestors had recorded their visions of the world beyond. 3 hours had passed since the posse rode away. 3 hours of silence broken only by the steady drumming of rain on stone and the occasional rumble of thunder that made the cave walls seem to pulse with life. Leah had said nothing during that time, simply staring into the sacred pool as if its waters might reveal the path that had led her to this moment. This choice that had changed everything. Fox studied her in the firelight, noting details he had missed during the desperate flight from Rawlings and his men. Her hands, though soft with privilege, bore small calluses on the fingertips, the marks of someone who played piano or perhaps wrote extensively. Her posture, even in exhaustion and fear, remained straight and dignified, the bearing of someone raised to command respect. But it was her eyes that held him, green as spring grass and filled with a pain that went deeper than the day's terror. The wedding dress that had once been pristine white silk now told the story of her desperate flight in tears and bloodstains. Fox could see where she had torn strips from the skirt to bandage her horse's legs, where thorns had caught the delicate fabric during her ride through the brush country. The pearls that had adorned her throat were gone, probably lost somewhere in the desert. But she still wore a simple gold locket that she touched unconsciously whenever thunder rolled across the canyon. "You're not telling me everything," Fox said finally, his voice cutting through the cave's silence like a blade through silk. "No woman flees her wedding simply because her husband collects scalps. There's more to your story, Leah Wells, and if I'm going to risk my people's lives protecting you, I need to know what it is." Leah looked up from the sacred pool, and Fox saw tears glittering in her eyes like captured starlight. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets that had been eating at her soul like poison. "You're right," she whispered. "The scalps were horrible, but they weren't what made me run. It was what Blackwood told me after he showed me his trophies. What he said about why he really wanted to marry me." She stood and walked to the cave wall, where ancient hands had painted a scene of warriors defending their village from enemies, her fingers tracing the faded pigments as if drawing strength from their courage. Fox watched her move, noting the way she favored her left leg. She had been injured during her flight, though she had said nothing about it. "My father didn't just promise me to Blackwood for political support," she continued. "He promised him something else, access to our family's mining surveys. For the past 5 years, government surveyors working for my father have been secretly mapping every inch of Indian territory, cataloging mineral deposits, water sources, strategic locations. Blackwood doesn't just want to kill native people. He wants to know exactly what he's stealing when he does it." Fox felt ice form in his stomach, despite the cave's warmth. Mining surveys meant gold, silver, copper, wealth beyond imagining hidden in the sacred places of his people. It meant that every treaty violation, every massacre, every broken promise had been planned in advance. that men like Blackwood saw native lives not as obstacles to overcome, but as weeds to be cleared from valuable land. The implications struck him like lightning, illuminating a landscape he had never seen clearly before. The random attacks by cavalry patrols, the seemingly arbitrary choices of which tribes to pursue and which to ignore, the precise timing of raids that always seemed to catch his people at their most vulnerable moments, none of it had been random at all. It had all been part of a grand design, a chess game played with human lives where his people had never even known they were pieces on the board. "Where are these surveys now?" Fox asked, his voice deadly quiet. "That's the problem," Leah said, turning back to face him. "They're in my father's personal safe in Colorado Springs, and only family members know the combination. Blackwood married me to get legal access to everything, the surveys, the mining claims, the government contracts. With me as his wife, he could claim joint ownership of my father's assets if anything happened to the senator." The implications hit Fox like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one woman's escape from an unwanted marriage. This was about maps that could guide the systematic destruction of every free tribe remaining in the West, knowledge that could turn scattered cavalry raids into precisely targeted campaigns designed to seize the most valuable land with surgical efficiency. Fox thought of his own people, scattered through the canyon system, families who had found refuge in caves like this one, children who played in hidden valleys that their parents believed were secret from the white world. If the government had detailed maps of every water source, every trail, every defensible position, then the canyon people were not hidden at all. They were simply being allowed to exist until it became convenient to destroy them. "And you know this combination," Fox said. "It wasn't a question. I memorized it when I was 12, Leah admitted. My father taught it to me as a game, said that family secrets were the most important kind of knowledge. He never imagined I'd use it to steal from him. The combination is the date of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the first one, from 1851. He said it would remind him of the promises America made to honor tribal sovereignty. The bitter irony of using a broken treaty as the key to documents planning further betrayals was not lost on Fox. He could imagine Senator Wells spinning the dial, reciting the sacred date, opening the safe that contained plans to violate every principle the treaty had supposedly established. Fox stared at her, understanding flooding through him like water through a broken dam. She hadn't just run from Judge Blackwood, she had run with information that could save or damn every native tribe from the Canadian border to Mexico. In her head was knowledge that men would kill for, that governments would go to war over. "You took copies," Fox said, and again it wasn't a question. "Before you fled, you went to your father's safe and took the survey maps." Leah reached into the torn bodice of her wedding dress and withdrew a leather portfolio, its edges waterproofed and its contents protected by oilcloth wrapping. Her hands shook as she offered it to Fox, and he could see the weight of betrayal and necessity warring in her eyes. Every map, every survey report, every government memo about mineral rights and land acquisition, she said. 5 years of planning to steal a continent, all documented in my father's careful handwriting. I couldn't let Blackwood have it. I couldn't be the key that unlocked the destruction of entire peoples. Fox took the portfolio, with hands that remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. The leather was warm from being pressed against her body, and he could feel the thickness of documents within. Papers that represented the difference between survival and extinction for his people. The portfolio was heavier than he had expected, weighted with more than just paper and ink. It contained the accumulated weight of surveying expeditions that had crossed sacred ground under the guise of peaceful exploration, of mapmakers who had recorded the locations of burial sites and ceremonial grounds with the same clinical precision they used to mark mineral deposits. Each page represented months of careful observation, years of patient intelligence gathering that had been conducted under the noses of people who had no idea they were being catalogued for destruction. "This is why they'll never stop hunting you," Fox said. understanding the full scope of the trap they now found themselves in. This isn't about a runaway bride anymore. This is about preventing the exposure of a conspiracy that reaches from territorial judges to United States senators. They'll bring the army if they have to. I know, Leah said, her voice breaking. That's why I said they'd drown me dead. Not just because Blackwood likes to kill women who defy him, but because I'm the only person outside the conspiracy who knows what's really planned. Once I'm dead, there's no one left to expose them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Fox opened the portfolio carefully, his eyes scanning the first document by firelight. It was written in elegant script on official government letterhead, and what he read made his blood run cold. Preliminary assessment of mineral resources in designated savage territories. Classification: most secret, authorized by Special Congressional Committee on Western Development. The document went on to detail gold deposits in the Black Hills, silver veins running through Apache territory, copper deposits beneath Navajo sacred sites, wealth measured not in thousands but in millions of dollars, enough to fund armies, enough to reshape the balance of power between nations. And at the bottom, in his father-in-law's careful signature, Senator Hamilton Wells, committee chairman. But it was the margins that told the real story, Fox realized. Notes written in different hands, comments from various officials who had reviewed the documents. One note written in red ink caught his eye: recommend immediate action before tribal populations can be relocated to less valuable territories. Time is of critical importance. For maximum resource extraction, the signature beneath was, unmistakably, Judge Blackwood's angular script. Your father isn't just supporting this, Fox said, his voice heavy with grim understanding. He's organizing it. This committee, these surveys, he's the architect of what Blackwood calls the final solution. Leah's face crumpled, and Fox saw the full weight of her betrayal settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. She hadn't just fled an unwanted marriage. She had stolen documents that proved her own father was planning genocide on an industrial scale. He raised me to believe in justice, she whispered, taught me that America was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. I thought he meant it. But when I confronted him about the committee, about what they were planning, he said that Indians weren't really people. They were obstacles to progress that had to be removed for the greater good. Fox felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had sustained him through 7 years of fighting against men who saw his people as less than human. But beneath the anger was something else. A growing respect for this white woman who had given up everything she had ever known rather than be complicit in mass murder. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up toward the cave ceiling, where they disappeared into darkness like prayers ascending to the spirit world. Fox found himself remembering his grandmother's stories about the first white traders who had come to Canyon Country, men who had spoken of friendship and mutual benefit while their surveyors mapped every water source and defensive position. History was repeating itself, but this time, one white person had chosen to break the pattern. So you decided to steal the proof and run, Fox said. I decided to steal the proof and find someone who could use it to stop them, Leah corrected. I was going to ride to the territorial capital, find a federal judge who wasn't on their payroll, expose the whole conspiracy. But my horse gave out, the storm hit, and Blackwood's men caught up with me faster than I expected. Fox studied the maps in the firelight, memorizing details that could mean the difference between life and death for his people. The surveys were incredibly detailed. Every water source marked, every game trail noted, every defensible position identified. It was as if the government had been planning not just to defeat the remaining free tribes, but to anticipate their every move, to corner them with scientific precision. One map in particular caught his attention, a detailed rendering of the canyon system where his people had made their home. complete with notations about seasonal camp locations, water availability during drought years, and what the surveyor had clinically described as natural choke points suitable for containment operations. Fox recognized his own village in the careful drawings, could identify the cave where his grandfather was buried, the spring where children played on summer afternoons. These maps show more than mineral deposits, Fox observed, his warrior's eye picking out strategic implications. They show attack routes, supply lines, places where cavalry could position artillery to maximum effect. This isn't just about stealing land, it's about conducting military campaigns with perfect intelligence. Blackwood called it the science of conquest, Leah said bitterly. He said the days of random Indian wars were over, that the government had learned to fight smart instead of just fighting hard. Every battle would be planned in advance, every native advantage neutralized through superior information. Fox felt the weight of history pressing down on him like stone. His grandfather had told him stories of the first white men to enter canyon country, how they had come as friends, seeking trade and safe passage. Each generation had seen the promises broken, the boundaries moved, the sacred places desecrated in the name of progress and profit. But this was different. This was the end game, the final act in a play that had been written before he was born. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. His people had never been fighting a series of separate battles against individual enemies. They had been fighting a single, coordinated war against an enemy that planned decades in advance, that treated human lives as entries in a ledger book to be balanced against potential profits. "There's something else," Leah said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Something Blackwood told me that you need to know. About your people specifically." Fox looked up from the maps, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. "The government knows about these canyons," Leah continued. "They've known for months. You think you're hidden, but they have detailed maps of every cave, every water source, every trail your people use. They're not hunting you yet because they want to wait until winter, when your people will be trapped by snow and unable to scatter into the deep desert." The words hit Fox like arrows, each one finding its mark in his heart. The canyon people had survived for 7 years in these hidden places, had built their lives around the assumption that their sanctuary remained secret. But if the government had maps, if they knew about the sacred caves and winter camps, Fox thought of the children who would be playing in those camps when the soldiers came, of the elders who would be unable to flee through snow-choked passes, of the mothers who would die trying to protect babies too young to understand why their world was ending. The clinical efficiency of it, waiting for winter to ensure maximum casualties with minimum resistance, revealed a level of calculated cruelty that took his breath away. "How long?" Fox asked, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "How long before they move against us?" "First snow," Leah said. Blackwood said the operation was scheduled for the first heavy snowfall, when your people would be concentrated in the winter camps and unable to escape through the high passes. He called it Operation Clearwater, in honor of your cousin who died fighting at the creek. Fox felt the world shift around him like sand in an earthquake. Running Bear's death was being turned into the name for the campaign that would destroy the last free Navajo, his cousin's sacrifice twisted into a celebration of conquest. The calculated cruelty of it took his breath away. But beneath the shock and rage, Fox's mind was already working, already calculating possibilities and planning responses. The maps Leah had stolen didn't just reveal the government's plans, they revealed the government's assumptions about how those plans would unfold. And assumptions, Fox knew from long experience, were weaknesses that could be exploited. The fire burned lower as Fox considered the implications of what he had learned. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the storm was beginning to move on, leaving behind the kind of crystalline silence that followed desert thunderstorms. Soon, Blackwood's men would return to continue their search, and every hour that passed brought the first snow closer. You said you were riding to find a federal judge, Fox said. Someone who could use this evidence to stop the conspiracy. Do you still believe such a person exists? Leah met his eyes across the fire, and Fox saw steel beneath her tears, the same steel that had allowed her to betray her own family rather than be complicit in genocide. Judge Samuel Morrison in Santa Fe, she said. He's the only territorial judge who wasn't appointed through my father's influence, the only one who's ruled in favor of native treaty rights. If anyone would listen, it would be him. But he's also the reason my father wants him removed from the bench. Morrison has been asking uncomfortable questions about land acquisitions and mineral rights. If we can get these documents to him before my father's committee finds a way to destroy his career, Santa Fe is 200 miles from here, Fox pointed out. Through territory that Blackwood's men will be watching, with every sheriff and deputy marshal looking for you. It would be suicide, maybe, Leah agreed, but staying here is definitely suicide, for both of us and for your people. At least if we try to reach Morrison, we have a chance of stopping this before it starts. If we do nothing, Operation Clearwater proceeds as planned, and by spring there won't be any free tribes left to save. Fox stared into the sacred pool, watching firelight dance on the water's surface like spirits offering counsel from the other world. His grandfather had taught him to listen for the voices of the ancestors in moments like this, to seek guidance from those who had walked similar paths in darker times. What he heard in the water's whispers was both terrifying and inevitable. This white woman's fate and his people's survival had become the same story. To save one, he would have to risk everything for both. There's a way, Fox said finally. Dangerous, probably impossible, but there's a way to get you to Santa Fe without traveling the roads where Blackwood's men are watching. Leah leaned forward, hope flickering in her green eyes like the fire between them. The old war trail, Fox continued. Apache routes through the deep desert, paths my grandfather learned during the Comanche Wars 50 years ago. No white man has ever mapped those trails because no white man has ever survived them. But they lead directly to Santa Fe, and if we travel fast and light, if we can endure what the desert demands of us, Leah interrupted. You're coming with me? Fox looked at her across the fire, this white woman who had given up everything to prevent genocide, who carried in her stolen documents the power to save or damn his people. The choice should have been impossible. Abandon his responsibilities as chief to escort her to uncertain safety, or stay and watch his people die when the first snow fell. But the spirits in the sacred pool whispered a different truth. Sometimes a chief's greatest duty was not to his tribe, but to the future that would exist only if he had the courage to gamble everything on hope. The Canyon people have survived this long because we know when to fight and when to run, Fox said. This time we fight by running toward justice instead of away from it. Outside the cave, thunder rolled across the sacred ground like the voice of ancient gods approving of choices made in darkness and doubt. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of their presence, preparing the earth for the journey that would either save them all or destroy them in the attempt. Dawn broke over the high desert like a crimson wound across the sky, painting the red rocks in shades of blood and copper that seemed to prophesy the violence to come. Fox Nightfeather stood at the mouth of the sacred cave, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Blackwood's men while behind him. Leah Wells prepared for a journey that would either deliver them to salvation or death in the wasteland that stretched beyond the known world. The storm had passed, leaving the air crystalline and sharp with the scent of wet sage and creosote. Every sound carried for miles in the thin atmosphere. The distant cry of a red-tailed hawk, the skitter of lizards across stone, the soft shuffle of Leah's torn wedding dress as she bound her feet with strips of cloth torn from her petticoat. Fox had given her a pair of moccasins taken from the emergency supplies he kept cached in the cave. But even with proper footwear, the trail ahead would test her in ways that no amount of privilege could have prepared her for. How far to the first water? Leah asked, adjusting the leather portfolio containing the stolen documents so that it rode secure against her back beneath the spare shirt Fox had provided. The contrast between her refined features and the practical clothing of a desert traveler created a strange duality that reminded Fox of the morning star, beautiful and distant, but burning with a light that could guide travelers through the darkness. 30 miles, Fox replied, checking the loads in his Winchester and the Colt Navy revolver he wore at his hip. Through country that will cook a man's blood in his veins if he doesn't respect its power. The Apache call it Ziln Chasian, the mountain that devours strangers. We must reach the hidden spring at Skull Mesa before the sun reaches its highest point, or we will join the bones of those who thought they could conquer the desert with ignorance and arrogance. Fox had spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing for their flight, gathering supplies from caches he had established throughout the canyon system during 7 years of guerrilla warfare against the cavalry. Water was their greatest concern. Each would carry only what they could bear on foot, for the war trail was too treacherous for horses. Food would be whatever they could find along the way: prickly pear fruit, barrel cactus hearts, the occasional rabbit or lizard that Fox could take with his silent bow. The bow was a thing of beauty, crafted from seasoned Osage orange wood and strung with sinew from deer hunted in the high country. Fox had made it himself during the long winter after Running Bear's death, pouring his grief and rage into the careful shaping of wood and the precise balance of spine and string. It could drive an arrow through a man's ribs at 50 yards without making enough sound to alert sentries. Had fed his people through lean times when gunshots would have brought soldiers running. "Why are you doing this?" Leah asked as Fox shouldered his pack, a question that had been building between them since the moment he decided to abandon his people for her cause. "You could send me into the desert alone. Wash your hands of whatever happens next. Your people need their chief, especially with winter coming. Why risk everything for a white woman you barely know?" Fox paused at the cave entrance, considering her question with the gravity it deserved. Through the narrow opening, he could see the trail that would lead them away from the only home he had known since childhood. Away from the people who depended on his leadership, toward an uncertain fate in the most hostile environment on Earth. 7 years ago, Fox said finally, my cousin Running Bear asked me the same question before he rode out to defend Clearwater Creek. I told him that some fights choose you instead of the other way around. This is one of those fights. But even as he spoke the words, Fox knew there was more truth beneath them, a deeper current that connected his fate to hers in ways he was only beginning to understand. Something about Leah Wells reminded him not just of his sister Ayana, but of his grandmother White Dove, the medicine woman who had taught him that wisdom sometimes came disguised as foolishness, that the greatest victories often looked like defeats until years later when their true meaning became clear. They slipped from the sacred cave as the sun's first rays touched the canyon rim, moving with the fluid silence of predators crossing hostile territory. Fox led the way, his moccasined feet finding purchase on stone that would have turned an inexperienced traveler's ankle, reading the landscape with senses honed by a lifetime of survival in country that forgave no mistakes. Behind him, Leah followed with surprising grace for someone raised in drawing rooms and ballrooms. The torn wedding dress had been replaced by practical clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, a broad-brimmed hat to shield her face from the merciless sun. But it was her eyes that impressed Fox most. The way she watched everything, absorbed every lesson the desert offered, stored away knowledge that might mean the difference between life and death in the hours to come. The war trail began where the last surveyor's map ended, at the edge of a geological maze that had been carved by wind and water over millennia into a labyrinth of slot canyons, hidden arroyos, and towering stone spires that rose from the desert floor like the fingers of buried giants. No white mapmaker had ever penetrated this far into the heart of the wasteland, because none had possessed the knowledge passed down through generations of Apache warriors who had used these routes to disappear from their enemies like smoke in the wind. Fox's grandfather, Stonewolf, had learned the trail during the wars with the Comanche, when young Apache braves would ride for weeks through this impossible country to raid settlements on the Rio Grande before vanishing back into the maze where no pursuit could follow. The old man had shared the secret reluctantly, understanding that knowledge of the war trail was sacred trust that could mean survival or extinction for the people. "Stay exactly in my footsteps," Fox warned, as they approached the first of many narrow passages that threaded between towering walls of sandstone. "One wrong step, one moment of carelessness, and you'll fall into cracks so deep your bones will never see sunlight again." The passage was barely wide enough for a single person, its walls rising 200 feet above their heads to create a slot of perpetual shadow where the sun never reached. The floor was polished smooth by flash floods that had carved the channel over countless centuries, and Fox could read the history of those floods in the debris lodged high above their heads. Entire trees reduced to bleached skeletons, boulders the size of houses left stranded like the eggs of stone giants. As they moved deeper into the maze, Fox began to understand why his grandfather had called this place the testing ground of the spirits. The silence was absolute, except for the whisper of their breathing and the soft pad of their feet on stone. Yet somehow the emptiness felt alive, pregnant with unseen watchers who weighed the worth of every traveler who dared enter their domain. "How do you know where we're going?" Leah whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Everything looks the same, to White Eyes perhaps," Fox replied, pausing at a junction where the passage split into 3 branches, each disappearing into darkness that could conceal death or salvation with equal ease. "But the ancestors left signs for those who know how to read them." He pointed to what appeared to be natural scratches in the stone wall, marks so subtle that Leah had to squint to see them at all. But Fox's trained eyes read them like words on a page, markers left by Apache warriors who had passed this way decades ago, encoded directions that would guide initiated travelers while remaining invisible to enemies who lacked the cultural knowledge to interpret their meaning. They took the left passage, climbing steadily through a corridor that gradually widened until they emerged onto a narrow ledge that offered their first clear view of the country ahead. Leah gasped at what she saw, an endless expanse of broken stone and scattered mesas stretching to the horizon, a landscape so alien and forbidding that it might have been carved from the bones of dead planets. "Dear God," she breathed, "we're going to cross all of that." "If we want to live," Fox replied, studying the distant landmarks that would guide their navigation through the maze. "And if we want your stolen documents to reach Judge Morrison before Operation Clearwater begins." But even as he spoke, Fox felt a chill of premonition that had nothing to do with the morning air. Something was wrong with the landscape ahead, some detail that didn't match his grandfather's descriptions of the war trail. It took him several minutes of careful observation to identify what troubled him. There were no birds visible anywhere in the vast expanse. No signs of the life that should have flourished around the hidden water sources that made travel through this country possible. "We need to move faster," Fox said, urgency creeping into his voice for the first time since they had left the sacred cave. "Something has changed since my grandfather's time. Something that has driven away the creatures that depend on the secret springs." They descended from the ledge and resumed their journey through the maze. But now Fox pushed the pace beyond what he had originally planned. His instincts, sharpened by years of warfare, screamed warnings that he couldn't yet interpret but dared not ignore. Behind them, somewhere in the conventional world of roads and towns, Judge Blackwood's men would be organizing a systematic search that would inevitably lead to the sacred cave and the discovery of their trail. Ahead lay mysteries that might prove more deadly than any human pursuit. The sun climbed higher as they navigated passage after passage, each one testing their endurance and resolve in new ways. Some were so narrow they had to turn sideways and shuffle through gaps barely wider than their bodies. Others opened into natural amphitheaters, where the silence was so profound it seemed to press against their eardrums like a physical weight. It was in one of these wider spaces that they encountered the first sign of what had driven away the desert wildlife. Fox spotted it first, a glint of metal half buried in sand that had been deposited by some ancient flood. He approached cautiously, his hand moving instinctively to his knife handle, and what he found made his blood turn cold. "Survey equipment," he said, holding up a theodolite that bore the brass nameplate of the U.S. Geological Survey. "Government surveyors have been here, probably within the last year. The war trail isn't secret anymore." Leah stared at the device in Fox's hands, understanding the implications immediately. If government surveyors had mapped the war trail, then their escape route was no longer the secret passage Fox had believed it to be. They were following a path that might lead directly into a trap. Could they have poisoned the water sources? Leah asked, remembering tactics she had heard discussed in her father's political meetings, methods for denying resources to hostile populations. "Is that why there are no animals?" Fox's expression grew grim as he examined the surveying equipment more closely. Scratched into the metal was a notation that confirmed his worst fears. WT7 mapped and prepared per committee. Instructions, water sources treated as directed. Jubin, the initials were unmistakable. Judge Blackwood had not only learned of the war trail's existence, but had taken steps to ensure that anyone using it would die of thirst in the wasteland. The hidden springs that had sustained Apache warriors for generations had been turned into death traps, poisoned with chemicals that would kill slowly and painfully anyone desperate enough to drink from them. They'd been planning this for months, Fox realized, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. Your father's committee didn't just map the obvious routes. They mapped the secret ones too, the paths that people like us would use when the obvious ones became too dangerous. We're not escaping into unknown country. We're walking into a carefully prepared killing ground. Leah sank down onto a boulder, the weight of betrayal and despair threatening to crush her spirit. Every move they made had been anticipated, every refuge turned into a trap. The documents she carried might expose the conspiracy, but only if they could survive long enough to deliver them, and survival was looking increasingly impossible. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go back, try to find another way." Fox studied the surveying equipment, his warrior's mind working through possibilities and probabilities like a chess player considering moves and counter-moves. The discovery of the survey markers changed everything, but it also provided new information that might be turned to advantage if used correctly. "No," he said finally. "We go forward, but not along the trail they mapped. There are older paths, routes that even the Apache abandoned because they were too dangerous for regular use. If the government surveyors found the war trail, they would have mapped only the practical route, not the nightmare passages that kill more travelers than they save." He pointed toward a crack in the canyon wall that was barely visible from their current position, a fissure so narrow and forbidding that it looked more like a scar in the stone than a passable route. "My great-grandfather spoke of the Ghost Walk, a path through the deep stone that the shamans used when they needed to disappear completely from the world of men. It leads to the same destination as the war trail, but through country so hostile that even the spirits fear to travel there. If we can survive what the Ghost Walk demands of us, we'll emerge behind any trap that Blackwood has prepared." Leah stared at the barely visible crack in the canyon wall, understanding that Fox was offering her a choice between certain death and possible survival through a passage that sounded more like a journey into hell than a path to safety. But looking at the poisoned survey equipment in his hands, she realized that hell might be their only refuge. "How many people have successfully crossed the Ghost Walk?" she asked. Fox's silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of ancient fears and hard-won wisdom. My great-grandfather called it the path that judges souls. Those who are worthy emerge into the light. Those who are not remain in the stone forever, their bones joining the countless others who thought they could take what the desert offered without paying what it demanded. They gathered their packs and approached the crack in the canyon wall, its dark mouth yawning before them like the entrance to another world. Fox took a moment to offer a prayer in the old language, asking his ancestors for guidance and protection on a journey that would test everything they were and everything they hoped to become. Once we enter, Fox warned, there's no turning back. The ghost walk allows no retreats, no second chances. We emerge on the far side, or we die in the attempt. Leah looked back one last time at the canyon, where they had found temporary refuge, then turned toward the darkness that would either deliver them to salvation or claim their lives as payment for their defiance of Judge Blackwood's carefully laid plans. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Then let's find out what we're worth, she said, and stepped into the crack in the stone. The ghost walk swallowed them like a living thing, its walls closing around them with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. But somewhere in the darkness ahead lay their only hope of reaching Santa Fe alive, and with it, the chance to prevent Operation Clearwater from painting the desert with the blood of innocence. Behind them, the conventional world continued its preparations for genocide, unaware that two fugitives had chosen to risk everything on a path that existed more in legend than reality. Ahead lay trials that would strip away everything except the essential core of who they truly were, revealing whether they possessed the strength to emerge from darkness into light. The ghost walk revealed its true nature within the first 100 yards, transforming from a crack in the canyon wall into a descent through living rock that seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness. Fox Nightfeather moved ahead of Leah Wells through passages so narrow they had to exhale to squeeze between walls of stone that pressed against them like the embrace of death itself. While above their heads the sky became nothing more than a thin line of blue that grew fainter with each step they took into the bowels of the earth. The air grew cold despite the desert heat above, carrying scents that had never known sunlight, the mineral tang of deep water, the musty breath of caves that had been sealed since the world was young, and underneath it all, something else that made Fox's warrior instincts scream warnings he couldn't yet interpret. His great-grandfather had spoken of the ghost walk in whispers, describing it as a place where the boundary between the living world and the spirit realm grew thin enough for determined souls to cross between them. Something died here, Leah whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space as they navigated around a pile of bleached bones that might have been human or might have been something else entirely. Recently, Fox knelt beside the remains, his experienced eyes reading the story written in scattered ribs and a skull that bore marks no animal had made. The bones were old but not ancient, perhaps a year or two at most, and they belonged to a man who had died hard in this forgotten place beneath the desert. "Government surveyor," Fox said, holding up a tarnished brass button that bore the eagle insignia of the United States Geological Survey. Probably the same team that mapped the war trail and poisoned the water sources. It seems the ghost walk claimed its payment from them as well. But even as he spoke, Fox noticed details that didn't fit the story of a surveyor who had simply lost his way and died of exposure. The bones had been arranged with deliberate care, positioned in a pattern that Fox recognized from the burial practices of his own people. Someone had found this man's remains and honored them according to ancient custom. Someone who understood the proper rituals for guiding lost souls to their final rest. "We're not alone down here," Fox realized, his hand moving instinctively to his knife handle as he scanned the darkness ahead for signs of movement. "Someone else has been using the ghost walk, someone who knows the old ways." The passage widened suddenly, opening into a vast underground chamber that stretched beyond the reach of their torchlight. Stalactites hung from the invisible ceiling like the teeth of some primordial beast, while flowstone formations created fantastic sculptures that seemed to watch their progress with mineral eyes. In the center of the chamber, a pool of water reflected their flames, like a mirror made of liquid obsidian. Fox approached the pool cautiously, testing the water with careful senses before allowing himself to drink. It was cold and clean, untainted by the poisons that Blackwood's men had used to corrupt the surface springs. Here in the deep places where government surveyors had never reached, the ancient waters still flowed pure and life-giving. "How much farther?" Leah asked, kneeling beside the pool to refill their water containers, while Fox studied the chamber's walls for the markers that would guide them to the next passage. The ordeal of squeezing through the narrow entrance had left her exhausted, her refined hands now cut and bleeding from contact with the unforgiving stone. "Impossible to say," Fox replied, locating the subtle scratches that marked the continuing route. "The ghost walk follows no earthly logic. It exists as much in the spirit realm as in the physical world. Distance and time have different meanings here." As if to prove his point, they began to encounter phenomena that challenged everything Leah thought she knew about the natural world. Passages that seemed to lead upward somehow deposited them deeper underground. Chambers that appeared small from the entrance revealed themselves to be vast cathedrals of stone when explored. Most unsettling of all were the voices, whispers in languages long dead that seemed to come from the stone itself, offering guidance to those who knew how to listen. "What are they saying?" Leah asked as they paused at another junction. This one marked by petroglyphs so ancient they seemed to have been carved by the hands of gods rather than men. Fox listened carefully to the whispers that rode the air currents flowing through the deep passages, his grandmother's training allowing him to interpret voices that most people dismissed as imagination or the sound of wind through stone. "They're warning us," he said finally. "Something waits ahead, something that doesn't belong in the world of the living." They pressed on despite the warnings, driven by necessity and the knowledge that Judge Blackwood's men would eventually discover their trail and pursue them even into this nightmare realm. The passages grew stranger as they descended, walls covered with paintings that depicted scenes from a history that predated human memory, great battles between forces that might have been gods or demons, the rise and fall of civilizations that had left no trace in the upper world. It was in the deepest chamber they had yet encountered that they found the source of the whispers and came face to face with the guardian of the ghost walk. The figure sat motionless beside another sacred pool, so still that Fox first mistook it for another stone formation carved by eons of flowing water. But as their torchlight fell across the seated form, he realized they were looking at a human being, or what had once been human. The guardian was ancient beyond measure, skin like dried leather stretched over bones that seemed too fragile to support life. Long white hair fell in braids that reached nearly to the cavern floor, adorned with feathers and beads that marked him as a medicine man of tremendous power. His eyes, when they opened to regard the intruders, held depths that spoke of centuries spent in communion with forces beyond mortal understanding. "Stonewolf's grandson," the guardian said in a voice like wind through autumn leaves, speaking the old language with an accent that belonged to no living tribe. "And the white woman who carries the paper knives that will cut the heart from the land itself. I've been waiting for you to arrive." Fox felt his world shift as he realized he was looking at his own great-grandfather, the legendary Stonewolf who had supposedly died in battle against the cavalry 20 years earlier. But death, it seemed, had not been the end of Stonewolf's story, merely a transformation that allowed him to serve as guardian of the Ghost Walk, keeping watch over the boundary between worlds. "Great-grandfather," Fox said, dropping to one knee in the traditional gesture of respect. "I thought you had crossed to the spirit world." "I have," Stonewolf replied with a smile that held echoes of the young warrior Fox remembered from childhood stories. But some crossings are not permanent. The Ghost Walk required a guardian, someone who understood both the old ways and the new threats that would come from the white world. I volunteered for the duty. Leah watched this reunion with growing unease, understanding that she was witnessing something that challenged every assumption about life and death, reality and legend. The documents hidden against her back suddenly felt heavier, weighted with the knowledge that the conspiracy she carried evidence of was part of a conflict that stretched far beyond her previous comprehension. "You know why we're here," Fox said. It wasn't a question. Guardians of sacred places always knew the hearts of those who sought passage. "The woman carries proof of the final plan," Stonewolf confirmed, his ancient eyes fixing on Leah with an intensity that seemed to penetrate to her soul. "The paper that will justify the last great taking, the excuse needed to complete what was begun when the first white foot touched this continent. But paper alone will not be enough to stop what comes." He gestured toward the pool beside him, its waters stirring with images that formed and dissolved like dreams made manifest. In the shifting reflections, Leah saw scenes that made her heart race with terror. Cavalry columns riding through snow toward hidden canyon villages, artillery being positioned to shell defenseless camps, mass graves being prepared with industrial efficiency. "Operation Clearwater begins in 3 days, Stonewolf continued. "The first snow has already fallen in the high country, trapping your people in their winter camps exactly as planned. Even if you reach the white man's judge, even if he believes your evidence and acts upon it, the machinery of war cannot be stopped in time." Fox stared into the prophetic waters, seeing his people's doom written in images that carried the weight of destiny. Every decision he had made, every sacrifice he had accepted, every hope he had clung to, all of it had been meaningless delay in the face of forces too vast and too well coordinated to be stopped by the actions of two desperate fugitives. "Then we've failed," Leah said, her voice breaking with the weight of despair. "Everyone will die because I wasn't brave enough to act sooner, because I trusted that justice could triumph over conspiracy." But Stonewolf shook his head, his expression grave but not without hope. "The paper you carry cannot stop what has already begun," he said, "but it can prevent what comes after. The conspirators believe that Operation Clearwater will end native resistance forever, but they are wrong. Hidden in the deep canyons are people who will survive the coming storm, who will carry the old ways into the new world being born. When the killing ends and the survivors emerge, they will need proof of what was done to them and why." He stood with effort that spoke of centuries rather than years, his ancient bones protesting the movement, but his spirit still burning with the fire that had made him a legendary warrior. "The Ghost Walk has one more gift to give," Stonewolf said, leading them toward a passage that Fox had not noticed before, a tunnel that seemed to glow with its own inner light. A path that exists outside of time itself, that can deliver you to Santa Fe not in days, but in hours. "But the price—" He paused, his eyes meeting those of his great-grandson with an expression that held both love and infinite sadness. "The price is that one of you must remain here as the new guardian, to hold the way open for future generations who will need the Ghost Walk's protection. The choice is yours to make." The implications hit both travelers like physical blows. To reach Santa Fe in time to prevent the complete genocide that would follow Operation Clearwater, one of them would have to sacrifice their mortal existence to become a guardian of the boundary between worlds. It was a price that couldn't be paid with gold or promises, only with the surrender of everything that made life worth living. Fox looked at Leah, seeing in her eyes the same terrible understanding that was tearing at his own heart. They had come so far, endured so much, only to discover that victory would require the ultimate sacrifice from one of them. "I'll stay," Fox said quietly. "My people need a chief who can guide them through what's coming, but they need someone to carry the proof of their persecution even more. You can speak to the white world in ways I never could." "No," Leah interrupted, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "You're wrong. Your people will need you to help them rebuild after the massacre, to keep their culture alive when the government tries to erase it completely. I'm the daughter of a senator. My death will mean something to people who would ignore the murder of thousands of Native Americans. If I become the guardian, my disappearance will force investigations that might prevent this from happening again. Stonewolf watched their debate with the patience of ages, understanding that this was a choice that could not be rushed or made lightly. The ghost walk itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which of these two souls would prove worthy of the ultimate sacrifice. There is another way, the ancient guardian said finally, but it requires trust beyond anything you have shown each other so far. He led them to the edge of the glowing passage, where they could see a tunnel that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, its walls pulsing with energies that existed beyond the physical realm. The Guardian's path can carry both of you to Santa Fe, Stonewolf explained, but only if you link your spirit so completely that you become one soul, sharing two bodies. Such linking has been done before, in the greatest emergencies, when the survival of entire peoples hung in the balance. Fox and Leah stared at each other across the sacred space, understanding that what Stonewolf proposed was more intimate than any marriage, more permanent than any oath. To link their spirits would mean sharing not just their thoughts and emotions, but their very essence, becoming so intertwined that the death of one would mean the death of both. If we do this, Fox said slowly, if we bind our souls together, what happens when we reach Santa Fe? Can the linking be undone? Stonewolf's expression grew sad, like a father watching his children face choices that would change them forever. Some bonds once forged cannot be broken, he said. To save your peoples, you would sacrifice not just your individual lives, but your right to exist as separate beings. You would become something new, neither fully Navajo nor fully white, but a bridge between worlds that might help both peoples find a path to coexistence. The choice hung between them like a blade balanced on its point, ready to fall and change everything. Around them, the ghost walk waited with the patience of stone, while above in the world of sunlight and violence, Judge Blackwood's men continued their search, and the machinery of genocide ground steadily toward its bloody conclusion. Leah reached out her hand to Fox, her fingers trembling with fear and determination in equal measure. I came here to stop a genocide, she said. If binding my soul to yours is what it takes to save both our peoples, then I choose the binding. Fox looked at her outstretched hand, then at his great-grandfather's ancient face, finally at the glowing tunnel that could deliver them to their destination in time to make a difference. The warrior in him rebelled against the idea of surrender, but the chief in him understood that sometimes the greatest victories required the greatest sacrifices. He took her hand, feeling the spark of connection that had been building between them since the moment they met. But this would be more than connection. This would be fusion, the melding of two souls into something that had never existed before. Then we make our choice together, Fox said, and stepped with Leah into the Guardian's path. The last thing they heard before the tunnel's energies embraced them was Stonewolf's voice, calling across the centuries with words of blessing and farewell. Go well, grandchildren of my heart. Save who you can, and remember that love is the only force stronger than death. Then the ghost walk closed behind them, and they were racing through dimensions that existed beyond time and space, their spirits beginning the transformation that would either save two peoples or destroy them all. They emerged from the Guardian's path not as two separate beings, but as something unprecedented in the history of both their peoples, a fusion of souls that burned with shared purpose, while their physical forms materialized in the pre-dawn darkness behind the Santa Fe courthouse. Fox Nightfeather and Ophelia Wells had entered the crystalline tunnel as desperate fugitives fleeing certain death, but what stepped out into the New Mexico morning was a single consciousness inhabiting two bodies, their spirits so completely intertwined that neither could tell where their individual thoughts ended and their shared awareness began. The transformation had been more profound than either could have imagined. Like being born again, with the memories and wisdom of 2 lifetimes flowing through one expanded mind. Fox felt Leah's refined education and political understanding as if they were his own experiences, while Leah possessed his warrior instincts and deep connection to the land as completely as if she had been raised in the hidden canyons of her childhood. They were no longer Navajo and white, male and female, chief and senator's daughter. They had become something entirely new, a bridge between worlds that had been at war since the first European boot touched American soil. But there was no time to marvel at their metamorphosis, for the consciousness they now shared could sense the approaching catastrophe with supernatural clarity. Through Fox's enhanced awareness of the natural world, they could feel the first heavy snows beginning to fall in the high country where the canyon people had established their winter camps. Through Leah's understanding of government machinery, they knew that Judge Blackwood's telegrams were already racing along copper wires, setting Operation Clearwater into motion with the precision of a clockwork engine designed to harvest human lives. The Santa Fe courthouse loomed before them like a temple to laws that had been written to exclude people like Fox's tribe. Its adobe walls painted gold by the rising sun that would either witness justice or genocide before it set again. Judge Samuel Morrison's chambers occupied the building's highest floor, and their shared consciousness could sense him there already. An early riser who spent the dark hours before dawn reviewing cases that would shape the territory's future. They moved through the awakening city with the fluid coordination of a single mind, controlling 2 bodies. Fox's warrior stealth and Leah's knowledge of urban navigation combining to guide them past the early risers who might recognize Senator Wells's missing daughter. The leather portfolio containing the stolen documents rode secure between them, its weight distributed across both their forms, as if the conspiracy it contained was too heavy for any single person to bear. But as they approached the courthouse steps, their enhanced perception detected another presence moving through the morning shadows. Deputy Marshal Tom Rawlings and 3 of his men, positioned to watch every entrance to the building where Judge Morrison held court. Somehow, despite their supernatural journey through the Ghost Walk, Blackwood's conspiracy had anticipated their destination and prepared to intercept them before they could deliver their proof. "They're watching all the obvious approaches," Fox's voice spoke the shared thought, his lips moving while Leah's mind provided the tactical analysis that guided their planning. "But there's a service entrance used by the cleaning staff. A basement passage that connects to the judge's private chambers. Rawlings has men there too." Leah's voice responded, her mouth forming words while Fox's enhanced senses detected the hidden watchers. "They're not taking any chances. Blackwood knows this is their last opportunity to silence us before the evidence reaches someone who can act on it." Their fused consciousness considered and discarded dozens of possible approaches, each one blocked by enemies who seemed to have unlimited resources and perfect intelligence about their movements. But then inspiration struck from an unexpected source, the spirit of Stonewolf, whose essence had become part of their merged being during the passage through the Guardian's path. "The old ways," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in a manner that would have been impossible for 2 separate people. "When direct assault fails, warriors must become invisible to their enemies' eyes." Fox's knowledge of traditional camouflage techniques merged with Leah's understanding of social invisibility, creating a plan that neither could have conceived alone. Within minutes, they had transformed themselves into exactly the sort of people that men like Rawlings had been trained to overlook. Fox became a day laborer in borrowed clothes, his distinctive features hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and artificially stooped shoulders, while Leah adopted the appearance of a Mexican washerwoman, her refined beauty obscured by deliberate dishevelment and the kind of clothing that rendered working women invisible to the privileged classes. They approached the courthouse separately, their shared consciousness allowing perfect coordination despite appearing to be strangers who happened to arrive at the same destination. Fox engaged one of Rawlings' sentries in broken English conversation about work opportunities, his performance so convincing that the deputy actually gave him directions to a construction site, while never suspecting he was talking to the most wanted fugitive in the territory. Meanwhile, Leah entered through the service entrance with a group of actual cleaning women, her borrowed appearance and fluent Spanish allowing her to blend seamlessly with workers who were accustomed to being ignored by the powerful men they served. Their plan required split-second timing and absolute trust in their spiritual connection. For success depended on actions taken by one body being perfectly synchronized with decisions made by the other. Judge Samuel Morrison was exactly what they had hoped to find, a man whose integrity had survived decades in a corrupt system, whose rugged face bore the lines of someone who had spent sleepless nights wrestling with questions of justice and law. He sat behind a desk piled high with territorial statutes and federal regulations, a cup of coffee growing cold beside legal briefs that would determine whether the territory's remaining tribes lived or died under the weight of expanding civilization. When Leah knocked on his chamber's door, in the guise of a cleaning woman seeking to empty his wastebasket, Morrison looked up from his papers with eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting losing battles against overwhelming corruption. But when she spoke in perfect English, when she revealed her true identity and placed the leather portfolio on his desk, the judge's expression transformed from weary resignation to electric alertness. "Miss Wells," Morrison said, rising from his chair with the careful movements of a man who understood he was witnessing a moment that would change everything. "Half the territory's law enforcement is searching for you. They say you're a dangerous fugitive who murdered her own husband and fled into the desert with stolen property." "They're half right," Leah replied, her voice carrying undertones that reflected her spiritual connection to Fox's perspective. "I did steal property. These documents that prove a conspiracy to commit genocide against every free tribe remaining in the Southwest. As for my husband, Judge Blackwood never was that and never will be, though he has certainly murdered enough people to deserve hanging for his crimes." Morrison opened the portfolio with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the recognition that he was looking at evidence that could topple governments and reshape the balance of power throughout the territory. His legal mind absorbed the implications with trained efficiency, understanding immediately that the documents before him represented not just crimes against individuals, but a systematic violation of every treaty and constitutional principle that supposedly governed relations between the United States and sovereign tribal nations. "Dear God," the judge breathed as he read Senator Wells' careful notations about mineral resources and military strategy. "This isn't just land theft. This is a planned extermination campaign designed to look like legitimate law enforcement. Operation Clearwater, when does it begin?" "Today," Leah said, the shared consciousness allowing her to speak with certainty about timing that Fox's warrior instincts perceived through their connection to the natural world. "The first heavy snow has already begun falling in the high country. By noon, cavalry columns will be moving toward every winter camp from here to Colorado, with artillery support and orders to take no prisoners who might spread word of what they witnessed." Morrison's face went pale as he understood the scope of the atrocity being planned in his jurisdiction. But before he could respond, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor outside his chambers. Rawlings and his men, no longer content to wait and watch, were coming to settle the matter with direct action rather than legal process. "The window," Leah said urgently, her shared consciousness detecting the approaching danger through Fox's enhanced senses. "There's a ledge that runs along the building's exterior, narrow enough that most men wouldn't risk it, but wide enough for someone with proper balance." But Morrison shook his head. his expression resolving into the kind of determination that had made him enemies among the territorial power structure. "No more running," the judge said firmly. "I've spent too many years watching injustice triumph because good people were afraid to take stands that might cost them everything. If these documents are genuine, and everything in them matches patterns I've observed in other cases, then my duty is clear regardless of the personal consequences." He moved to his desk and began writing with swift, decisive strokes, his pen scratching across official letterhead as he composed what would either be his masterpiece of jurisprudence or his political suicide note. "Emergency injunction against all military operations in designated tribal territories," Morrison explained as he wrote. "Federal court order requiring immediate congressional investigation of land acquisition irregularities. Warrant for the arrest of Judge Cornelius Blackwood on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and violation of constitutional rights." The door to his chambers burst open just as Morrison finished signing the documents. Rawlings and 3 heavily armed deputies flooding into the room with weapons drawn and faces set in the kind of grim determination that came from following orders that brooked no disobedience. "Judge Morrison," Rawlings said, his voice carrying false politeness that didn't extend to his cold eyes, "I'm afraid you're harboring a dangerous fugitive who's wanted for questioning in connection with terrorist activities against the territorial government. Miss Wells needs to come with us for her own protection." "Miss Wells is under the protection of this court," Morrison replied calmly, not looking up from the legal documents he was still preparing. "And these chambers are sovereign territory under federal judicial authority. You have no jurisdiction here without proper warrants. Judge Blackwood's authority supersedes yours in matters of territorial security," Rawlings countered. But his voice carried the uncertainty of someone who wasn't entirely sure about the legal ground he stood on. "Stand aside or be charged with obstruction of justice." It was then that Fox materialized from the shadows behind the deputies, his warrior training and supernatural enhancement combining to make him seem like a force of nature rather than a mere man. The shared consciousness that connected him to Leah had given him precise knowledge of each deputy's position and readiness, allowing him to move with the kind of fluid precision that turned combat into deadly artistry. The fight that followed was brief and decisive, Fox's enhanced abilities making him more than a match for men who relied on intimidation rather than skill. 2 deputies found themselves unconscious before they understood they were under attack, while the 3rd discovered that his gun had somehow been removed from his holster and was now pointing at his own head in Fox's steady grip. Rawlings himself found the business end of his own pistol pressed against his throat, held by a man whose eyes reflected depths that spoke of spiritual transformation beyond anything the deputy had encountered in his career of violence and corruption. "You have a choice," Fox said quietly, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from more than one throat. "You can leave this courthouse peacefully and carry a message to Judge Blackwood, or you can remain here permanently as evidence of what happens when evil men forget that some things are worth dying for." Rawlings stared into Fox's transformed eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold, not just the promise of personal death, but the reflection of powers that existed beyond the reach of badges and political authority. This was no longer just a Navajo warrior defending himself against corrupt lawmen. This was something that existed between worlds, something that drew strength from sources that no government could control or destroy. "What message?" Rawlings asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell Blackwood that the evidence has been delivered to federal authority," Fox replied. "Tell him that Operation Clearwater is terminated by court order, and any officer who participates in genocide will face trial for crimes against humanity. Tell him that the age of taking whatever you want from people who can't fight back is ending." Judge Morrison rose from his desk, holding the completed legal documents that would either stop a massacre or get them all killed for treason against the established order. "Deputy Marshal Rawlings," Morrison said formally, "you are hereby ordered to carry these federal injunctions to every military commander in the territory. Any officer who proceeds with unauthorized military operations against civilian populations will be held personally responsible for violations of the Constitution of the United States." Rawlings took the papers with hands that shook slightly, understanding that he was holding documents that would reshape the power structure of the entire Southwest. But more than that, he was seeing the end of the world he had known. A world where men like Judge Blackwood could plan genocide with impunity because they believed no one had the power to stop them. "This won't end here," Rawlings said as he backed toward the door, his deputies helping their unconscious companions to their feet. "Blackwood has resources you can't imagine, connections that reach to Washington itself. Stopping Operation Clearwater will just delay what's inevitable, maybe," Fox and Leah said simultaneously, their merged consciousness speaking through both voices in perfect harmony. "But delay gives people time to prepare, time to organize, time to fight back with something more than desperation. And sometimes that's enough to change everything." After Rawlings and his men had gone, the three of them stood in Morrison's chambers, surrounded by the debris of a confrontation that had changed the course of history. Outside, the sun had risen fully, painting Santa Fe in shades of gold that seemed to promise a different kind of future than anyone had imagined possible. "What happens now?" Morrison asked, studying Fox and Leah with the expression of someone who was trying to understand phenomena that existed beyond his previous experience. "Those documents you brought me will cause earthquakes in Washington, but earthquakes can be dangerous for everyone in their path." Fox and Leah looked at each other, their shared consciousness processing possibilities that stretched far beyond the immediate crisis. They had prevented genocide, at least temporarily, but they had also revealed themselves as something unprecedented, a fusion of cultures and spirits that challenged every assumption about what was possible in a world torn apart by racial hatred and competing visions of progress. "We build bridges," they said together, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with the very stones of the courthouse. "Between peoples who have been taught to see each other as enemies, between cultures that have wisdom the other needs to survive, we become proof that different doesn't have to mean enemy." Through the window of Morrison's chambers, they could see the snow-capped peaks where the canyon people waited in their winter camps, unaware that their lives had been saved by a love story that transcended every boundary their ancestors had known. The conspiracy that had threatened them was broken, at least for now, but the deeper work of healing wounds that went back centuries was just beginning. Judge Morrison gathered the remaining documents that would need to be filed with federal authorities, understanding that his life had also been changed by the morning's events. He would spend the rest of his career fighting legal battles that would determine whether the principles of justice could triumph over the machinery of oppression, whether the Constitution's promises could be extended to people who had been excluded from its protection since the nation's founding. "The world is changing," Morrison said, looking at the two beings who had catalyzed that change through their willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at justice. "It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but something fundamental has shifted today. People like Judge Blackwood will find it harder to operate in shadows when the light of federal scrutiny is shining on their actions." Fox and Leah walked to the window that overlooked the plaza where Santa Fe conducted its daily business, watching people go about their lives without knowing how close they had come to witnessing the final act of a genocidal conspiracy. Their shared consciousness could sense the ripple effects already beginning to spread. Telegraph messages racing toward Washington, military commanders receiving unexpected orders to stand down. Corrupt officials beginning to understand that their carefully laid plans had been exposed to the light of justice. But more than that, they could feel something new being born in the space between worlds, a possibility that had never existed before their souls had merged in the depths of the Ghost Walk. They were living proof that the barriers between peoples were not as permanent as hatred made them seem, that love could literally transform the nature of reality when it burned with sufficient intensity. "We should go back," Fox said, his individual voice speaking thoughts that belonged to both of them. "My people will need to know what's happened. We'll need help understanding how to live in the world that's being born from the ashes of the old one. And I need to face my father," Leah added, her voice carrying the steel that had allowed her to steal documents from her own family rather than be complicit in genocide. To make him understand that his vision of progress built on the bones of innocence is not the only path America can take. They turned from the window and walked toward the door that would lead them back into a world that had been fundamentally altered by their choices. Their merged consciousness already planning the work that would occupy the rest of their transformed lives. Behind them, Judge Morrison continued his preparations for legal battles that would determine whether justice was more than just a word carved in stone above courthouse doors. The story that had begun with a desperate cry in a desert storm, "If they find us, they'll drown me dead," was ending with something no one could have imagined. Two souls so completely united that they had become a new kind of being, one that existed as living proof that the barriers between peoples were not as permanent as hatred made them seem. In the years that would follow, Fox Nightfeather and Ophelia Wells would become legends in their own time, advocates and bridge builders who helped negotiate a new relationship between the government and tribal nations. Their merged consciousness offering perspectives that neither culture could have achieved alone. But that morning in Santa Fe, they were simply two people who had discovered that sometimes the only way to save the world is to transform yourself so completely that you become the change you want to see. The sun climbed higher over New Mexico territory, illuminating a land where genocide had been prevented and justice had found a way to triumph over conspiracy. It was not the end of conflict between cultures, but it was proof that such conflicts need not end in extinction, that sometimes, when souls unite in perfect love and shared purpose, they can literally reshape the world around them. 7 years had passed since that fateful morning in Santa Fe, when two desperate souls merged into something the world had never seen before. And the high desert of New Mexico territory bore witness to changes that no mapmaker could have charted or surveyor could have measured. The canyon people still lived in their ancient strongholds, but now government supply wagons traveled the old war trails, bringing medicines and tools rather than soldiers and bullets, while telegraph lines carried messages of cooperation rather than orders for extermination. Fox Nightfeather and Ophelia Wells stood together on the rim of Whispering Canyon, their merged consciousness allowing them to perceive the transformation of their world with senses that belonged to both their peoples. Below them, Navajo children played alongside the sons and daughters of white settlers, their laughter echoing off red stone walls that had once hidden families fleeing cavalry raids. The sacred spring where they had first met now served as a meeting place for tribal councils and territorial officials who came seeking the guidance of the legendary bridge builders. Chadi Pedasenis Nlatula, the leather portfolio that had once contained stolen documents, now held correspondence from Washington lawmakers seeking advice on the Native Rights Protection Act, legislation that Fox and Leah had helped draft during 3 years of testimony before congressional committees. Judge Morrison had proven correct in his prediction that the evidence they provided would cause earthquakes. In the capital, earthquakes that had toppled corrupt officials and established new precedents for tribal sovereignty that stretched from Alaska to the Mexican border. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices that night in the sacred cave? Leah asked, her voice carrying the harmonics that marked their shared consciousness even when they spoke separately. She wore the practical clothing of a frontier advocate now, her refined beauty tempered by years of sun and wind and the kind of hard work that came from building a new world with your own hands. Fox smiled, his weathered features reflecting the wisdom that came from serving as both war chief and peace negotiator for people caught between two civilizations. The silver and turquoise bands on his arms now included symbols from both cultures, eagle feathers representing his Navajo heritage, alongside a small cross that honored Leah's Christian upbringing. Visual proof that their merger had created something richer than either tradition alone. Different choices would have led to different people making them, he replied, his individual voice speaking thoughts that belonged to their unified being. We became who we needed to be because the world demanded it. Sometimes, the spirits choose their instruments not for who they are, but for who they can become when love burns away everything that isn't essential. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of the adobe house they had built, where the old war trail met the government road, a dwelling that served as both home and headquarters for the Wells Nightfeather Mediation Service. Their reputation had spread far beyond New Mexico territory. Tribal leaders from as far away as the Dakotas sought their counsel when treaty negotiations stalled, while territorial governors requested their assistance in resolving conflicts that threatened to ignite new wars. The work was never easy, for the wounds carved by centuries of mistrust and betrayal could not be healed with mere words or good intentions. But their shared consciousness provided something unprecedented in such negotiations, the ability to understand both sides completely, to speak with authentic authority about the needs and fears that drove each party toward conflict. Judge Morrison had been correct about another prediction as well. The legal battles following Operation Clearwater's exposure had indeed been dangerous for everyone in their path. Senator Hamilton Wells had suffered a political death, more complete than any physical demise, his career destroyed by revelations about his committee's genocidal plans. The senator had retreated to his Colorado Springs mansion, where he lived as a broken recluse, his former allies abandoning him as if his corruption might prove contagious. Judge Cornelius Blackwood had fared worse, his collection of scalps becoming evidence in a federal trial that sentenced him to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. He had died in federal custody 3 years earlier, his last words reportedly a curse against the half-breed witch and her savage demon, who had destroyed his vision of progress through extermination. But the most profound changes were not recorded in legal documents or congressional records. They lived in the hearts and minds of people who had discovered that their supposed enemies were simply neighbors they had never been allowed to know. Mixed marriages between tribal members and settlers were no longer scandalous rarities, but increasingly common unions that produced children who carried the best of both worlds in their blood. The reporter from the Santa Fe newspaper will be here soon, Leah reminded Fox, checking the pocket watch that had been a gift from Judge Morrison on the 5th anniversary of their historic testimony. She wants to write about the anniversary of Operation Clearwater's cancellation, about how the country has changed since then. What will you tell her? Fox asked, though their shared consciousness already knew the answer. The truth, Leah replied. That love isn't just an emotion, it's a force of transformation that can literally reshape reality when two people are willing to surrender everything they thought they were in order to become what the world needs them to be. Thunder rumbled across the desert sky as afternoon. Clouds built toward the daily storm that would bring life-giving rain to the high country. The sound reminded them both of that first night, when Leah had stumbled into Fox's world, carrying secrets that could have destroyed two peoples. How terror and desperation had somehow alchemized into the kind of love that legends were built upon. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Fox and Leah walked hand in hand toward their adobe home, their footsteps perfectly synchronized by the consciousness they shared. Behind them, the sacred spring bubbled with clear water that had outlasted empires and would outlast the governments that currently struggled to define justice in an imperfect world. 7 years earlier, a terrified bride had cried, "If they find us, they'll drown me dead," in a desert storm, never imagining that her words would prove prophetic in ways she could never have expected. The woman she had been did die in those hidden canyons, drowned not in water but in love so complete it dissolved the boundaries between souls. What emerged from that drowning was something unprecedented, living proof that the barriers between peoples were not as permanent as hatred made them seem, that two individuals willing to sacrifice everything for justice could literally reshape the world around them. The legend of Fox Nightfeather and Ophelia Wells would outlive them both, inspiring future generations to believe that love could triumph over fear, that understanding could bridge any gap, and that sometimes the most important transformations began with someone brave enough to cry out for help in the darkness. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.